in the quiet rooms of Uruk's great temple complex, where oil lamps flickered against the growing darkness, something miraculous was happening. What had begun as simple marks pressed into clay to track grain and sheep was transforming into something far more profound, the first form of human expression preserved beyond memory. That these scribes, working by lamplight in ancient Iraq, could never have imagined that their wedge-shaped marks would carry voices across 5,000 years of silence, that their clay tablets would preserve not just accounts and inventions, but the very soul of human civilization itself. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scribal school near Uruk's ziggurat, 6,000 years before Christ. In the courtyard, young men sat cross-legged on reed mats, their faces intent with concentration as they practiced the ancient art. It was still so new, it had no name. Before each student lay a small tablet of damp clay, and in their hands they held the revolutionary tool that would change human history. A simple reed stylus, cut and shaped from the marshes that surrounded their city. A teacher, his beard grey with years of wisdom, demonstrated the technique that had been perfected over mere generations. Press firmly, he instructed, but not too deep. The clay must accept the mark, but not break beneath it. With practiced movements, he created the wedge-shaped impressions that gave cuneiform its name. Marks that began as pictures, but had evolved into something far more flexible and powerful. What these students were learning was more than a trade skill. They were mastering humanity's first technology for preserving thought itself. The transformation had been remarkable. Within a few centuries of those first accounting marks, cuneiform writing had evolved from simple pictographs into a sophisticated system capable of capturing the full complexity of human language. A symbol that once meant only barley could now be combined with others to express concepts as abstract as debt, promise, or justice. The mark for water could become part of words meaning tears, purification, or life itself. This flexibility opened possibilities that transformed civilization. For the first time in human history, laws could be written down exactly as intended, ensuring that justice would not depend on the fallible memory of judges. Stories could be preserved in precisely the words their authors chose, allowing wisdom to accumulate across generations. Knowledge could be stored, referenced, and built upon in ways oral tradition had never allowed. In the temple archives of Uruk, thousands of tablets were already accumulating. Records of harvests and tributes, inventories of precious goods, contracts between merchants from distant lands. But increasingly, scribes were using their revolutionary skill to capture something more profound: the thoughts, dreams, and beliefs of the people who lived between the rivers. Religious hymns, pressed into clay, preserved the exact words used to praise the gods. Legal documents recorded not just what was decided, but why, creating precedents that would guide future judgments. Letters between cities carried news, requests, and the personal thoughts of administrators, who might never meet face to face, but were connected by the threads of cuneiform communication. Most remarkably, stories were beginning to emerge, tales that went beyond simple record-keeping to explore what it meant to be human in a world filled with both wonder and uncertainty. Trade was transforming as dramatically as writing itself. From the gates of Uruk and its sister cities, merchant caravans departed on journeys that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. They followed trade routes that stretched like arteries across the ancient world, carrying not just goods, but ideas, techniques, and stories that would cross-pollinate civilizations separated by thousands of miles. Northward through the Syrian highlands, traders climbed toward the mountains of Anatolia, seeking the copper and silver that Mesopotamian craftsmen transformed into tools and ornaments. Their donkey caravans moved slowly but steadily through landscapes where other settlements were learning the lessons that Uruk had pioneered: how to organize urban life, how to specialize labor, how to preserve knowledge in written form. Eastward, Toward the rising sun, other expeditions crossed the Iranian plateau, trading with peoples who were developing their own sophisticated cities along the Indus River. These distant civilizations, though separated by geography and culture, were wrestling with similar challenges: how to feed large populations, how to organize complex societies, how to maintain trade networks across vast distances. But it was the westward routes that carried Mesopotamian innovations toward lands that would one day become legendary. Through the Levantine corridor, traders carried cuneiform tablets and the knowledge they represented toward the shores of the Mediterranean. In settlements that would eventually become great cities like Damascus and Aleppo, local peoples encountered this revolutionary technology of preserving human thought and began adapting it to their own languages and needs. The most precious cargo on these trade routes continued to be lapis lazuli, that brilliant blue stone, quarried in the mountains of Afghanistan and carried across more than 1,000 miles of desert and mountain to reach the workshops of Mesopotamian cities. Here, master craftsmen carved it into beads and cylinder seals that caught sunlight like tiny pieces of sky fallen to earth, symbols of wealth and status. They connected Mesopotamian civilization to a trade network spanning from the Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea. These cylinder seals themselves represented another innovation, born from the marriage of art and writing, carved with intricate scenes and cuneiform inscriptions. They served as both signature and story when rolled across soft clay. A merchant's seal might depict him making offerings to his patron deity, while the accompanying text identified him by name, profession, and city of origin. Administrative seals showed complex mythological scenes that spoke of the owner's education and cultural sophistication. But perhaps most significant were the changes happening within Mesopotamian cities themselves, as writing transformed from a specialized skill to a fundamental tool of civilization. In the residential quarters of Uruk, where families still gathered round evening fires to share meals and stories, something new was happening. The oral traditions that had carried human culture for millennia were being written down, preserved in the exact words that storytellers had perfected over generations of telling. These weren't just accounts of gods and heroes. They were humanity's first conscious attempts to understand their place in a vast and mysterious universe. The epic tales emerging from this process would echo across time, stories of brave kings who journeyed to distant lands seeking wisdom and immortality, tales of gods who shaped the world through their struggles and triumphs, myths that explained why the rivers flooded each year, why the stars followed their eternal patterns, why humans experienced love and loss, joy and sorrow. Most compelling of all was the tale of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose story blended history, myth, and profound meditation on what it meant to be human. Described as 2/3 god and 1/3 mortal, Gilgamesh embodied the dreams and fears of his people in the tale that was slowly taking shape on cuneiform tablets. He journeyed across distant lands, seeking the secret of eternal life, only to discover that immortality lay not in endless existence, but in the deeds that outlive us, the friendships that enrich us, and the wisdom we pass to future generations. Though Gilgamesh's quest for personal immortality remained unfulfilled, his story itself achieved the immortality he sought. Etched in cuneiform onto clay tablets that would survive the rise and fall of empires, speaking to each new generation about the eternal human condition. The scribal schools were expanding beyond the temple complexes. As the demand for literacy grew throughout Mesopotamian society, young men from merchant families learned to read and write so they could manage far-flung trade operations. Administrative positions required literacy as record-keeping became more sophisticated. Even some craftsmen learned enough cuneiform to sign their works and record their techniques. These schools developed sophisticated curricula that went far beyond basic writing skills. Students learned mathematics, necessary for calculating areas of fields, volumes of grain storage, and fair distribution of water rights. They studied astronomy, tracking the movements of celestial bodies that guided both agricultural timing and religious festivals. They memorized literary works that preserved cultural values and historical memory. Most importantly, they learned that knowledge itself was a form of wealth, something that could be accumulated, preserved, and transmitted across generations in ways that material goods could not. This recognition would prove prophetic, whereas the cuneiform tablets they created would outlast the gold and silver, the elaborate palaces and towering walls, carrying the voices of ancient Mesopotamia across millennia of silence. The legal implications of written language were equally revolutionary. In earlier times, disputes had been settled by elders, whose decisions depended on memory, precedent, and personal judgment. Now laws could be codified, creating consistent standards that applied equally to all citizens, regardless of their personal relationships with judges or rulers. The earliest law codes were emerging from this process, not arbitrary decrees imposed by rulers, but systematic attempts to organize society according to principles of fairness and reciprocity. Trade relationships were being formalized through written contracts that specified exactly what goods would be delivered, when, and under what conditions. Merchants could now engage in complex transactions with partners they might never meet, confident that written agreements would be honored across vast distances. This enabled commercial networks to expand far beyond the reach of personal relationships, creating economic connections that spanned continents. Letters between cities carried not just official communications, but personal messages that revealed the human side of these ancient civilizations. Administrators complained about difficult working conditions, requested transfers to more pleasant postings, and shared news of their families. Merchants reported on market conditions, requested specific goods, and offered advice about political developments in distant regions. These personal communications, preserved on thousands of clay tablets, provide intimate glimpses into lives lived 5,000 years ago that feel remarkably familiar to modern readers. The concerns were universal: making a living, maintaining relationships, hoping for security and prosperity for one's children. The medium was revolutionary, but the message was timelessly human. As evening settled over the cities of Mesopotamia, as oil lamps flickered to life in scribal schools and administrative offices throughout the region, something profound had been accomplished. Human thought had achieved a kind of immortality, preserved in clay that would outlast bronze and stone. The voices of poets and administrators, merchants and priests, kings and common citizens had been captured in wedge-shaped marks that would speak across thousands of years. In quiet rooms throughout Uruk and Ur, Eridu and Nippur, scribes continued their patient work by lamplight, unaware that they were creating libraries that would survive the collapse of their civilization. Each tablet they inscribed added another voice to humanity's growing conversation with itself, a dialogue that would continue across millennia, as each generation discovered the thoughts and dreams of those who came before. The technology they had created would spread throughout the ancient world, adapted to new languages and new purposes, but always serving the same fundamental function: preserving human thought beyond the fragility of individual memory. From Mesopotamia, writing would travel to Egypt and transform into hieroglyphs, to the Levant, where it would evolve into alphabets, to distant lands where local peoples would create their own systems, for capturing language in permanent form under the eternal stars of ancient Iraq. These scribal pioneers rested peacefully in their cities of mud brick and human ambition, their day's work complete, but their legacy just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new tablets to inscribe, new stories to preserve, new voices to add to humanity's growing library of thoughts and dreams. But tonight, in the archives of Mesopotamian temples, thousands of clay tablets held the captured voices of civilization itself. Counts and stories, laws and letters, hymns and histories that would outlive their creators by millennia. The revolution in human communication was complete. The age of preserved thought had begun, and the voices in clay would whisper across time forever.